I'm Brian Chapman from the University of Melbourne. It's his cancer survivor narrative memoir we're going to be talking about today. And my name is Donna Ziegenfuss, and I'm at the University of Utah, and I'm a qualitative researcher that's been working with Brian on his project. So Brian, you want to introduce yourself?
I recently relocated from the University of Utah to Australia, and my background is electrical engineering leading into medical informatics, but behind all that, driving everything I was doing is really kind of my experiences as a patient, as a child, and kind of shaping what I thought was important in terms of research and education.
Okay, so I met Brian related to some projects around campus. He kind of found me. He was writing a grant and they needed some help with some curriculum and assessment work, evaluation work. We come from very different places. So Brian is definitely in the medical area and engineering area, and I'm a social scientist, so my degree is in education, although I'm working as a librarian in the Marriott Library at the University of Utah. So we come kind of from very different excuse me, perspectives on approaching this project. So we did make a connection because of a grant originally. And this grant, I was going to work as an evaluator on the grant. Brian was one of the co-PIs, and they were teaching biomedical informatics classes to graduate students and postdocs and clinicians. The grant was through NIH, and the grant was funded, which kind of solidified our relationship. So we kind of continued on to do other projects. So even though we kind of came from different areas, I started talking to Brian about my research. He was telling me about his research. And I was talking about a topic of boundary crossing, which was really is what I'm looking at, and how librarians kind of boundary cross into a whole bunch of different areas. And he was chairing a conference and was like, oh, we should make the title or the theme of this conference boundary crossing, and you should come and do a workshop about how to help faculty.
I had a set of concrete boundaries that I was aware of in terms of where I was on one side and I saw most of my peers on the other. But then this kind of partnership has kind of opened up I would say just another set of boundaries that I wasn't aware of. And so crossing over and, kind of seeing that qualitative perspective has made me more boundary crossing, I guess.
So the one day we started talking about his memoir, and I said, oh, it'd be really neat to do some coding on that memoir and see what the themes are. So Brian, you want to talk a little bit about your memoir and what your expectation was coming into this project for doing qualitative research on it?
This was a project that was probably started in my early 20s to try to get a kind of a handle on how my life was shaped and influenced by these two cancers that I had and subsequent kind of complications that I had as a patient. And so this was a very personal kind of exploration and trying to sense making for me. And I had worked on off and on for probably 15, maybe close to 20 years before I met Donna, although I had kind of put it down for several years. And I think about the time that I met Donna, I was starting to see a lot of the biomedical informatics education that we were doing was kind of dry, kind of removed from the realities of medical experience, abstract. And I was starting at that point of kind of thinking of how could I enrich the student experiences that I was working with by incorporating some of my experiences into the teaching experience. And so I did hand it over to Donna with a lot of trepidation in terms of how personal and revealing it was, and kind of handed it over, then kind of like held my breath, I guess.
So Brian was looking for coding about the medicine, how medicine had changed He had applied for a book proposal through NIH to convert this memoir into a book, and I was really interested in the more affective experiences that he had relayed in his memoir, how he felt, how his family was impacted, what his life was like. So then, 215 pages later of en vivo coding, we have 6 themes that emerged.
So the 6 themes were dealing with the realities of the disease or cancer, feeling, then reacting, trying to make sense of the situation, relating and connecting, fearing for the future, and then moving forward with hope and resilience.
Yeah, so I think that so I was 7 years old, almost 8, in these this first cancer, which these all relate to, and it was very much kind of this progression of experiences that was in some sense, no, alarming isn't quite the right word, but I had some symptoms. I had some blood in my urine, but I didn't have pain. I didn't have any, really kind of acute issues. And so it was kind of this kind of abstract idea that there was something wrong with me. And then that just kind of kept getting worked up into, a more concrete thing until I finally had the surgery. I think looking back and writing this, it became very much a thought of that the experience was in some ways more concrete for my parents than they were for me. And so these are a lot of reporting back the what the physicians are telling my parents. I'm not really told very much, but I think that when I sat down and did this, it was very concrete that this was a joint experience of myself and my family. My parents and my mother concretely. The once I have the surgery, it becomes very concrete, and then when we go into the chemotherapy, and I guess maybe one of the strange things to me, kind of looking back on life, is that even though this is 45 years ago, very concrete memories, and my memories before these experiences are very vague. And so these, like the sphygmomanometer around my head, the neighbor, kind of making fun of me. So I guess kind of 2 things: the realities of the cancer from like some abstract idea to a therapy and a recovery, but also that it's not just me. Yeah, I think that looking back, and I think this is where society and medicine and psychology has matured. That I don't know that there was a lot of concern for my psychological well-being. I'm feeling all these things, and that didn't seem to come into the purview of the medical establishment, or kind of much of a concern. And yet, between this time when I'm 7, 8, and when my next medical event occurs when I'm 15, there was really a lot churning along in my mind that was clearly the product of these past experiences, and were being untreated. And I think that if Don's saying I'm looking, well, how has medicine changed? I hope that now if there's more psychological support that's provided to a child or a patient or whatever. To me, it was very much just kind of bubbling out in terms of kind of suboptimal school performance, kind of being the class clown or whatnot, and then just a lot of fear that I didn't really know how to express to anyone. Like I didn't ever tell my my parents that I didn't think anyone would ever marry me because I only had one cancer, one kidney. But it's something that was just continually there with me and kind of inescapable. Yeah, so I came from a very religious background, and so religion was always hovering over everything that was going on. And I didn't comment on, but the last slide, like this burden of a survivorship and being saved and having purpose, and so kind of just this exaggerated sense of sin or whatnot. So God was always on my mind in kind of a theoretical sense. I certainly thought about it a lot, but when it gets right down to it, the question that was just always at the forefront of my mind is, when was the next thing going to go wrong? And this is this comes kind of more later on. When I was 15, I had another cancer, and it resulted in a burst appendix and peritonitis, and I had a lot of surgical bowel blockages caused by surgical adhesions that would just pop up kind of out of the blue. And so that just really triggered this something wrong is around the corner all the time, and that was ultimately what was consuming all my mental energy. When was the next disaster going to happen? Certainly, as this cancer, I don't know that I kind of used the word cancer survivor at the time, but I certainly viewed myself as distinct and apart from my peers, at least the ones that I was aware of that certainly had these kind of experiences. And so there were this dynamic of alienation. I'm different from them. But I think what ended up becoming stronger is the need to connect. And I was actually just talking with some friends about this at dinner last night. I had kind of natural experiments that would occur, and because I had many hospitalizations. Some of the hospitalizations I had a lot of friends visit, and some I think just from the randomness of timing and scheduling and what time of year it was, very few people would visit me. And so I just became very aware of how dependent and how much need I had to connect with other people. And so it almost became, once I would get out of the hospital, almost kind of an exaggerated need to connect and make these relationships with other people. And so this girl that I'm writing about here, Teresa's not her real name, was probably selected in this case because she was the athlete, and that's what I felt the most loss, was the loss of my body and my strength and my posture and my athleticism. And so I just really wanted to make these connections with her. And it was kind of strange because in one sense that you would think that might bring to mind exaggerating in my mind what I've lost, but I really wanted to assert this connection, maybe in a denial that I had lost anything. Yeah, certainly the future of what was immediate in terms of when is the next kind of medical event going to happen, but also having a hard time of looking far in the future. And one of the things that, because I had a hard time looking to the future and so behaving in a way that would kind of optimize opportunities in the future, I ended up with a lot of kind of suboptimal performance. And then so I'd had this from 15 to 17 almost continual medical experience, and I think I kind of had 7 or 8 surgeries in those 2 years, and then they kind of suddenly ended. And so now I was feeling well and looking at a future and feeling that I wasn't well prepared. But I do think it was kind of, I feel lucky that I was able to get a good enough score on my ACT that I could get a scholarship despite all my poor performance in other aspects of life. So hope, and I think those are both interesting words that Donna picked as themes, because I think they're both ideas that I've struggled with, and that I think that I've had a hard time feeling that I have. And talking to various therapists of, well, just look how much trying to view myself as a survivor. Look how much you've survived, which is kind of that resilience theme. When I first met my wife, I would just make her so mad because I would quote A.E. Housman's poem, "Hope lies the mortals in most believer, but man's deceiver was never mine." But one thing that I did is that there were certain things that I turned to as means of escape to kind of calm my mind, I guess. And so that really became art, where I could concentrate a lot and kind of slow my mind down, things that I would later learn in therapy. I think art kind of naturally provided for me. Plus that, because I still would have had this concern about survivorship and how long would I live, that art versus the music, which was the big kind of extracurricular switch in my high school life, that art provided some sense of permanence. And this I would do paintings and drawings and give them to my friends, and it was very much, I think, driven in this thought that, well, when I'm gone, there'll still be this piece of art that will remain, versus the other transient things that I might have participated in instead.
So then where are we going next? Brian and I have talked a lot about looking at other illness stories to find themes that kind of go across them. And this is one example. Brian sent me an article, preface to my mother's diary, which was written by a son who talks about his brother who died from Wilms tumor before he was born. And when I did the coding, I could code to all of the themes that came out of Brian's story, except for moving forward with hope and resilience. It was more about the experience of his mother and the family at that time. So there really wasn't a thinking of moving forward with hope and resilience.
One of the things that this project working with Donna has really kind of shaped me is broadening my thinking from I kind of viewed a lot of this experience as these discrete medical events. I was hospitalized, I had a surgery. And now, and this is kind of parallels kind of a broadening of the field. So I got my degree in medical informatics, and now the term is moving towards health informatics. And I think that my own thinking is following that and just looking at how much of like this lived experience is beyond these discrete medical events, and how much kind of the continuous patient experience and where people need help and support is so much broader than that kind of inpatient acute setting, has really kind of changed how I'm thinking of my own research and what I want the medical students and others to learn and be aware of as they go through the training experience.
So thank you very much for sticking with us through the end of our presentation here. And we look forward to conversation and questions at the conference in January.